Welcome to Sib Spot. Today's Reddit stories are from MaliciousCompliance. Story 1 is by Happy Scattered Reader. Tell us the right time! For many years, my family would take trips with other family members. All of these trips had one thing in common. My aunt, uncle, and cousins would be late for everything. This used to really irritate my parents, who are pretty punctual and have a lot more kids to organize, 4 of us, compared to my 2 cousins. By mutual agreement, any other family involved in these outings decided to go along with my parents and give aunt and uncle the wrong time. For example, if an event started at 11 a.m., they'd be told 10 a.m. This was pretty effective until aunt and uncle started realizing they were being given the wrong time. I believe other family members explained why that was, and they were fed up with always waiting on them or being late. Self-awareness not being very apparent that they were the issue, it was decided by them that it wasn't their fault. And they told my parents, "Give us the right time from now on and you'll see we aren't the problem." My parents, especially my mom, hates the idea of people missing out on something, but is also prepared to let a natural consequence occur if it is not too harsh. The very next week, they had a day trip booked on the ferry. This was something we did about once a year over to the UK and back in one day. Fondly known as a booze cruise back in the day due to the opportunity to purchase cheap alcohol. Kids would explore the ship, and when we docked, raid the pick and mix of Woolworths and buy confection that we couldn't get at home. It was something everyone looked forward to a lot. What can I say? It was the early 90s. With the best will in the world, the ferry waits for no man. So it was a sad day for 4 people who were told the ferry left at 8 a.m. sharp, the correct time, and who arrived at 8:30 to see a small ferry-shaped speck in the distance heading towards the UK. Sadly, it didn't make them any more punctual after that, but they were always told the correct time as requested, and if they were late, we didn't wait anymore. For months, whenever we'd see them after that, my parents used to cheerily wave and say, "Very nice to see you." Somebody has clever parents. Our next story today is by Hot Cryptographer 552. A six-pack by any other name. I was in the Army way back when the internet was new and computer-illiterate commanding officers had their clerks print out emails so they could read them. As a young private, after work me and my buddies would often stop by the Class 6 store on post, an Army liquor store, to buy beer after we got off duty. One day, me and my buddy grabbed a 12-pack of beers on the way to the barracks. When we got to the barracks, we had to pass the CQ, charge of quarters, basically a guard posted at the entrance to the barracks. The CQ that day was Specialist E4, who I really didn't get along well with. He was mad he had to pull CQ duty, and he was always trying to find everyone's stupid infractions. He had taken a special interest in me for some reason. The CQ told us we could only bring 6 beers into the barracks. Since he was an E4 and outranked myself, an E2, and my friend, E3, I was very respectful when I asked him what he meant. He pulled out a 3-ring binder with the barracks' standard operating procedure and pointed to the section that said a soldier could only bring 6 beers into the barracks. Interesting. I thought about handing my friend 6 beers and taking 6 to myself to get around this stupid rule, but this guy would log that we opened the 12-pack of beer outdoors in the logbook, and we'd get in trouble anyway. But then, I had an interesting idea. I thanked the CQ and told my friend to come on. We walked back to Class 6 and got a refund on the beer. Then we bought 6 40-ounce bottles of malt liquor. We went from 144 fluid ounces of beer with 12 12-ounce cans to 240 fluid ounces of malt liquor in 6 40-ounce bottles. When we returned to the barracks, the CQ wanted to inspect our package. He just about hit the ceiling when he saw I was carrying 6 40-ounce bottles. CQ, "I told you you can only bring 6 beers into the barracks." Me, "There are 6 beers in here. I can count them off if you like." I then proceeded to count them before he could respond. Flustered, he allowed us to proceed. The next morning, the first sergeant, highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the company, called me to his office. He yelled at me for about 5 full minutes before he calmed down long enough to tell me I was getting an Article 15, non-judicial punishment, roughly the military equivalent of a plea bargain. Why? Because I violated his standard operating procedures by bringing 6 40-ounce beers onto his barracks. That was when I heard the CO, commanding officer, a captain in the next office over, call for the first sergeant. First Sergeant jumped up and went straight to the CO's office. I strained to hear them talking for a few minutes. From what I could make out, they were reviewing the standard operating procedures and comparing to the CQ log. But their voices got louder as they started expressing different views, and I could hear that part clearly. First Sergeant: but it says clearly you can have a 6-pack of beers. CO: First Sergeant, it says you can have 6 beers. First Sergeant: but it's obvious it means 6 cans of beer. CO: no, First Sergeant, it's not obvious. Send that soldier back to work. We're done here. A couple of seconds later, I could feel the sheer anger as First Sergeant stormed back into his office and bellowed, "Get the F out of here." So I did. So what they need to do is specify how many ounces exactly you're allowed to bring out to the barracks. That will clear up any confusion or snarky men who are just trying to get their way. Down in the comments by Mr. Loisius Mithrax. Great use of, quote, "it says what it says, not what it doesn't," quote. Good on that, CO. Just seems like a waste of people's time to call them in the office over that tiny infraction. Our next story is by According Air 5665. Relocate our office space, see how that works out for you. This one is a small victory, but it was super satisfying for me, so I wanted to share. I worked for a large international accounting firm with offices all over the country. Our boss, Karen, was well liked until she became the boss, a smiling assassin type who only cared about her position and looking good in front of the higher-ups. All about the numbers, even if what we had to do to get to those numbers didn't make any sense. So here's the story. My team of about 12 people were primarily based in the London office, but once a week, per my contract and everyone else's, were required to work in a remote office ages from London. This place was miserable. A building in the middle of nowhere. One tiny corner shop for snacks, next to a motorway. The closest place to eat was 15 minutes drive away. We all hated it. But hey ho, it was only once a week. Anyway, when our boss got promoted, her sole life mission was to cut costs. Everything from stopping overtime to telling us we had no stationary budget for pens and had to take from other teams' stores, to allowing only one meal on social drinks, and making comments at the meal when someone chose theirs to be more expensive option. For example, "Are you really choosing that? It's expensive. I'm not sure we are going to have enough budget." This is considering all other teams went for large fancy dinners all the time, unlimited drinks, etc. At one point, she decided that the miserable location should be our primary office and she wanted us all to go there 4 days a week instead of 1. All but one of our team were living in London. This meant for me a 2.5-hour journey, one way instead of 1 hour. After a few months, this really took its toll. The assistant manager, a friend of mine, told me she said in passing to him that the office was less of a cost on our team budget than the London office. What a shock. I decided to speak with HR and see what my options are, maybe get an exception. Well, turns out we had a policy that anything over your normal travel hours to the closest office location to your home could be used as your working hours, aka the extra 1.5 hours each way would be considered working hours. So I could arrive at 10:30 instead of 9 a.m. and leave at 4 instead of 5:30. Also, if trains and things were delayed or canceled, that would also be included in working hours. This happened often as this place was in the middle of nowhere, infrequent trains. So I was often arriving at 11:30. I forwarded the emails with HR to her and explained how I would be complying with this policy. She agreed, but tried in a meeting to tell me this was an exception for me and not to tell anyone else. Well, I told everyone else. Oh, yes. Strength in numbers, OP. And we all began complying with the policy. This meant we spent less time in the office and productivity dwindled. She mentioned this in a lot of meetings. I would often, respectfully, point out that it didn't make sense to force us to travel to this office and its effects. I was the main one speaking up about this. At some point, maybe a few months later, she told me I could go to 5 days in the London office, but again, this was special arrangement for me, and she appreciated me and was making accommodations only for me. She also said she would tell everyone I had special circumstances that allowed me this arrangement and to keep our conversation confidential. I honestly think she just got fed up with me pointing out how our productivity is lower only because she made us travel there 4 days a week. Of course I complied, but then the team noticed I wasn't with them and let's just say it caused a bit of a riot. I didn't say anything, but they figured it out themselves. No special circumstances here. Slowly but surely, one after the other, my colleagues started joining me in London, getting their own special arrangements with her. At some point, the majority were in London. Eventually, it was just her and the only other local colleague at this office while we were all in London. We all had a good chuckle about when she would cave. It took a good few weeks. Then we got the email that our permanent location going forward would be London 5 days a week, and that the one local employee to that terrible office would work from home and come in once a month. It may have happened anyway, but I'd like to think that me speaking to HR and finding that policy at least had a hand in getting us moved back to London. As for Karen, I could go on about so many stories with her, but I did eventually leave for other reasons directly related to her. Unfortunately, she is still the same person at that company. I do, however, enjoy seeing her checking my LinkedIn profile from time to time, and hopefully noticing that since I've left, I've gone from a junior to the same position as her. Don't try to cut costs by changing what's working. There should be limits to what you change if you want to cut costs and productivity is already good. But some managers just don't seem to see that. Our stories for today have come to a close. Until we meet again, you guys have a fantastic day.